We need to work on this wing today. Try to get the inner tip done, but first we need a little inspiration. I always find the two things that pay most: to start a day with a big cup of coffee that's left over from the night before, and about a 10-minute reading session right after breakfast looking at my Mustang, Spitfire, B-17, whatever books. Now, I don't think I'm alone in this. I think most people, and this is one of the reasons little things you can pick up off the video. If you look around my shop, I have pictures everywhere. The reason is I like to be inspired, you know. I like to be looking at a picture of somebody who plane I saw at the Nats and say, yeah, I want to do one like that, or even maybe a little better or whatever. And I guess when it comes to subjects like Spitfires, Reno Air Racers, Mustangs, things that there's plenty of literature on, and in my case, many people that have contributed this stuff, it's very easy to get inspired, and the inspiration is part of what makes, I think, for the best modeling you possibly can do. Now, I always think there's a lot of good things you can pick up off the video. I went on a shopping spree yesterday, and I got a bunch of items for the shop that I think are all going to benefit us, benefit me, I hope, and in turn benefit you. This is from Woodworker's Warehouse. I've had that address up on the catalog, but this is, I'm now getting into the final sanding on a wing, some 320. They usually don't make this in grits less than 320, but sometimes you can find it, and I don't know why. I don't know why they don't make it fine. It's a sticky back paper. In this case, it's Sun brand. But what this is good for, making up those little sanding blocks. And in a case where, I'll just show you a real good trick. In a case where you want to get into a spot where it's difficult to get a sanding block or a tube, you can just put this on the end of your finger, squeeze it down like that, and you've got a little sanding stick virtually any shape. So if you've never used this stuff, before we even get down and start working, this is one of the things I bought on my shopping spree, like the sandpaper from hell here. Anyway, this is really good stuff. It's well worth the money you pay for it. These are just some of the things that I've managed to buy at these woodworker places. And this is another brand that I've used. This is Free Cut. This is a little more aggressive about cutting. But again, because it's sticky back, two things happen when it's sticky back paper. It's usually a very high quality paper, so if you were to figure out how many square inches of material you get, it's probably more expensive. But it's a much better grade of paper, and I've found that for final finishing, this, I'll call it gray for lack of a better word, here's a new roll, and I spent over $100 today. But the point is, what is this? This is $220, I think. Anyway, the point is, good sandpaper, like good tools, like good anything. Even if you buy these, and these are available like at less money from Home Depot, but you can't make strips out of them. You can't make sanding bars. But sticky back paper, if you're not familiar with using it, and hey, anybody that's subscribing to the videos and playing along here and whatever, I'll be glad to send you a couple little samples of this if you want to check it out and see if it's worth it in your case. And in the case of woodwork, if you live out in the middle of nowhere, and there isn't a Woodworker Paradise around, or one of these places that sells this, get the catalog. You can mail order it, and I'll send you a free catalog. I always have an extra catalog of these sandpaper places, and they are excellent. They deliver right to your door in 3 days. It's something you need to have if you're a serious modeler. A couple of days we've been trying to make do with this pad. I guess this is the right word. I've had this duct tape that's just a bunch of old sheets and stuff. But you know what, again, like whenever you want to get serious about something, you need the right tools, you need the right things. So today we'll get rid of all this, and I'll save these for covering. But I also on my shopping spree yesterday bought the correct bed pad, and this is about 10 bucks. Really worth having too. What this is, and this is one of the best investments you'll ever make. Ooh, nice girl. Is a porno pillowcase. Now, what it is, they call it a support mattress cushion, and this is the premium one. It's 2 inches thick. Why do I have a razor if there's a zipper on the bag? Anyway, I always buy a new one each year and then use the old one that usually by then has some Brodak dope or some CA on it. I always use that in a van, to protect the mats in the van. Obviously, you want to, in the case of my table, I buy the smallest one I can. You know, and there's no secret. All my life, when I was a kid, and maybe up till, maybe it's still true, I don't know, I was kind of poor. And I'd always use things, and then I used sandpaper and wind up with old glue and all kinds of stuff. I never could afford to have the right tools, the tools I really wanted. Well, I still can't if Karen had her way. Just kidding, Karen. Anyway, this is one of the things I think everybody can afford to have. I call it an egg crate pad, but there's probably a real name for it. You can see it just kind of fits real nice on your table. And I always put a couple little strips of duct tape or glue or some tape or something to hold it down. But what that does, at this point in time, if you're using this side, now when I'm doing a rib wing, I don't like to use this side because this catches the cap strips. But if you're doing a fuselage or shells or whatever, when you're doing a wing, it's always best to have this side. And again, a couple of pieces of duct tape to hold it down. But in the life of this model, you'll put more dings in a thing. You'll put $10 worth of spackle, at least I did anyway. A lot of times you just have to convince yourself to get the right tool, the right part, the right sandpaper, the right... Wait, this is another example, just looking at something. Joe Adamusco got me this thing for dispensing tape. After I have it, I don't know how I ever lived without this stuff. This stuff just makes your life so easy. All you need to do is just put the covers on. That's only to keep this from sliding off the table. Again, when I'm doing a rib wing, I don't want to have this side up. On other cases, the little ribs, like when you're sanding a fuselage, they hold it in place. Anyway, another thing about these pads, they're not that expensive, number one. Number two, they give you a good little surface to work off. Now in this case I want to do some final sanding before I start on the other tip. I'll do that off camera. When you're doing all this final sanding, usually all the sanding dust will fall in one area. And it sticks to this, unlike glass. Then at the end of the day you can take the vacuum with the brush or during the construction and clean it right up. It's just one of the little things. Once you use one of these pads, you wonder, wow, how did I ever go without it? It's such a handy tool. Okay, we got our wing laid out, and on a previous video we trued up so we have all 90-degree angles, roughed out the block, have that little bit of an angle back, have roughly the radius we need. So again, a lot of this is going to be a repeat from the first tape, and I won't put it on camera. The first thing we're going to do, and if you need to see it, of course it's on the previous, I need to trace this out, cut off the big piece, the pieces that I don't need with the saw, and then get into a rough shaping before I actually attach it. I can just roll up the lead outs, in this case, right inside the wing. First thing is get this tacked on and get that outline on there. Important step, just like on the outer tip, is to have the center lines lined up and have a piece of tape holding that on while I trace it out. Now, needless to say, we've used the two lightest pieces, and they were pretty similar. The two lightest pieces for the inboard tip, because any weight that we leave out here, and I try to get pretty fanatical about getting all the weight out of the inboard tip. Outboard tip, not critical at all. Going to put lead out there anyway. I only try to get it as far forward as I can, just for my own, I like to have it forward so I don't wind up, if I wind up with a tail heavy plane, it's far enough forward, it's not a problem. Anyway, in this case, roughing these blocks out, again, the same as doing the outboard tip. A handy little thing, maybe I didn't put this on video. When I'm working on a wing, what I do is I have this little tray, I guess like a Staples tray, keep my pens and all little things that I might be using in this part of the project. The reason is, at this point in time, I don't want to have a pen floating up under the wing or something that's, when I'm pressing down, it's going to leave a gouge. So I've been finding it real handy just to keep all the little instruments of torture in a little tray. In fact, in the case of the pad, I leave it off to the side so that while I'm actually working, in fact, this is ready to pull that pin out. This is one thing you don't want to do. This will wind up leaving a dent. And in my case, I don't want any dents in here if possible. Alright, I get the jigsaw, saw that right off. Another little tip, another little thing that's worth its weight in gold are this jet vacuum dust system. has been so helpful in keeping the dust down in the house. And the way I monitor that is I look at the furnace filter this time of year, and it's almost totally clean now, where before I'd put a new furnace, a filter in maybe once every 2 weeks. And the trick is always leave the pencil line or pen line on. Leave a little extra material or work your way into it. Just want to make sure in this, I'm just going to rough carve this, but not make it even get close to the pen line. Leave enough material on so that after this is tack glued on and I have a piece of tape, I can do the final cutting. But it's just easier for me to do a lot of the rough cutting, the rough removal of material here. Just a lot easier to do it out in midair like this. Or in the case if we had decent weather, which we don't, do this outside and just let the chips blow into the neighbor's yard. Good fertilizer. By the way, for anybody who doesn't know, I always empty out that jet vacuum bag, which is usually full of mostly balsa dust, right into the mulch pit in the back. It makes great fertilizer. Anybody that's a real gardener will tell you what great fertilizer that makes. Anyway, being able to rough some of this out ahead of time is a big, big advantage. No substitute here for just using a new blade. I put a new XL blade in here whenever I'm going to do any kind of carving. It sounds like you're spending a lot of money, and at the end of a model you use 100 blades and you think, wait, I spent you know, X amount of money. But the blades made it so much easier. In fact, in the past I've tried to sharpen blades and try to reuse them, and when I was a kid my mother wouldn't buy me real knives. She'd make me use like razors with tape on one end. But that's what's fun about this hobby. You really don't need a lot of tools to be a proficient modeler. You need so few tools. Just imagine what it would be like if you wanted to be into drag racing. Or go price out some of the model railroading equipment now, especially O-gauge. Get a real reality check how good this hobby really is. Or go buy a model helicopter if you want to see some expensive stuff. One of those propane jets. Anyway, being able to rough this out, I don't want to belabor this. So easy to get it roughed out before you actually attach it right to the part. I always find this a big help. Okay, with this piece roughed out, now I need to get it lined up and tack glued in place. Again, another great use for these surgical pins that John Pothier introduced me to. We're going to get the address of where you can buy these. They have even different ones. I spoke to John yesterday, and they have a little bit better one. It has a dish tip. We're going to be trying to get some of those also. These are worth, talk about little tips worth their weight in gold. Anyway, now I want to get some fresh thin CA and just put some tacks on here to hold that in place. Now with that tack glued in place, most important thing is that I have the center lines kind of lined up here. I can do the final carving now, and then we'll be ready to snap it apart and hollow it out. Before I actually carve it, I want to lay 2 layers of masking tape up along here. For reason being, I want to have this just a little bit bigger in the final sand out. When I sand that in, I just want to come up to the tape, and after it's glued in permanently, and believe me, this is one part I'm trying to make as light as possible. I can just come right up to that sandpaper and use that as a guide. It's really a good idea when you're doing that final carving. It really gives you a little cushion if you make a mistake. Okay, now I've got that sanded right down to the thickness of the tape. The next step is going to be to get the tape off, pull a block off, and then obviously split it and hollow it out. Okay, the next step, of course, is to rough these out. I do that with the little tool that has the little kerf on it. And I'll try to get as much material out of here as I can, so they're, in effect, they're like 2 clamshells when I'm done with this operation. Cool, you never realize how handy it is, this little battery-powered thing. And what's funny, down at, just happened to be at Home Depot on my little shopping escapade, they have a sale with 3 of these tools, 3 of them, that is, a drill, a saw, and something else, and this little guy, All three for $59. It's hard to believe I paid 50 bucks for this. Shows you what a good shopper I am. Anyway, I'd like to use this to hollow this out. Again, I'm trying to get this as thin as I possibly can. Yeah, the dust just disappears. That jet vacuum is so nice. Again, I want to make the inner tip a lot lighter than the outer one, but I don't want to make it so thin as soon as you squeeze it, it breaks either. Nice thing about this little tool too, you can bring it to the field. It's even handy, you can rob convenience stores with it. Okay, give me all your money or I'll shoot you with the wizard. I try to look up at the light. You can see the fluorescent light. I can see I'm getting kind of thin in the back here. So that's about all I can sand on these shells. And even though I like to get the last little bit of weight out, I want to get a smooth surface in here anyway. Again, what's nice about sticky back paper, you can fold it back over on itself. And what it does, it gives your fingers a little grip that you normally, when you're in a compound curve like this, you want your fingers to assume the contour. Okay, now that these are nice and hollowed, I noticed two things. This is a little thin in the back, so what I'm going to do when I join these together is put a piece of 16th in there. I kind of got this a little thinner than I wanted to. There's always a recovery way. Just put a little thin slice of 16th in there, it'll be fine. Now I'm going to make the lead outs a little bit different. Instead of having an adjustable slider, I'm going to make a little basswood block out of a landing gear block. Again, one of the reasons is I want to make this tip as light as possible. Second reason, last year I didn't even have adjustable lead outs in a plane and it was fine. So this I think is going to be a good alternative. And I haven't done one of these. Lou Dudka and I used to do it this way in the early 80s, and for some reason I abandoned it. I want to go back and see if this is going to be a viable way of doing it. And if it isn't, I can just make a slider up. Anyway, this way worked out. So far, the two clamshells are just perfect. Couldn't be happier with those two. Now the two tips hollowed out. They're just about 5 grams. Now, the point of this is, if you make them a lot lighter than 5 grams, and I've gotten them down to 3. What happens when they're real super thin? They get really flexible, and I get a little bit nervous about it. So we're going to settle here for a 5 gram wingtip. It's a little thicker than I want in spots, but I really feel like for that extra gram or two, I'm buying some security there. Just start by roughing out. This is just an old piece of, I guess at one time it was a gear block or something. And it's basswood. Basswood has almost no grain. It's about the weight of 15-pound balsa wood. But it has one of the nice things is it's really easy to get nice shapes in it, and it holds up very well under this kind of a use. So when Lou Dudka, Glenn Metter used to do, Jimmy Casale, they used to use this method. I kind of shied away from it after a while, because what they did is they tried to eliminate the basswood altogether and just use balsa wood, and then it would get really flimsy. So by using basswood, it kind of, well, we hope it's going to save us from that. We'll make a little test one up, see how it works, and if it doesn't work, never be afraid to go back to the old way. Now I just laid out with a ruler where I want the holes to be tentatively, so let me just run the drill and the Dremel tool down there. I need a slot, obviously, to move the wires too. And make sure the holes I drill are not just some giant holes. These are listed as 3/32 eyelets. Well, that must be the ID. So I want to drill about a 1/18 drill. I want to get, if anything, a little on the tight side. So the first thing I'll do is drill these up with the holes one size under on that precision set of drills that I have. One size under 1/18. This is where it really pays to have a nice, that set of Midgley drills. It is a couple of thousandths less. About tools you think you're never really going to use, but once you have them, you don't realize how you ever lived without them. A set of precision drills. Wow. You know what I did? I had to do this about 4 times to figure out the best way to do it. What I did, I drilled all the holes. And obviously you can lay them out in any sequence, but I wouldn't want to get them any closer than the width of a hole separated, of course. Then you need to cut a groove in here, the thickness of the lead outs. Well, that's a little difficult to do, so what I did, I sawed the whole piece right in half, then put a piece of 64th plywood on both sides, because that's roughly the same thickness as this groove. Then I took a piece of the wire, a piece of sandpaper, so it has a piece of 64th plywood glued in each end. I took a piece of this double back sandpaper and just try to get just the minimum amount. I don't want to make a big sloppy fit. I just want to make it that the only thing I need to be able to do is drag the wire through there. And most of all have a nice fit. Let me get one of these little lead outs in here and do this. That when I'm all done, this is a nice pressed tight fit in there. And of course, needless to say, trying to check all the stations. Now, of course, I'll need to inset this into that wingtip. This, of course, is what you want to be able to do, is just have the minimum that you can drag that wire through there. You sure don't want to make these holes any bigger than they have to be. And I would say one thing, even when Lou used to do this with balsa wood, he would harden it up with CA, but it still was a little bit touch and go. So I want to make sure that I do have enough clearance here that I can just move this through. Good way to hold these two in alignment. Everybody has trouble when you go to hold these together. They want to slip and move and everything. A couple pieces of masking tape, just hold them, and I want to tack them first before I put a permanent glue joint, and I want to put a little shim of balsa wood in the back, because I think I've thinned that out just a little bit too much. But it's always good to know a way of recovering from a small error like that. I just want to make what amounts to be a little shim, and it's always good to know how to make little corrections. This will just allow me to get this, in fact, let's put it this way. A lot of times you thin a part out too much and you hate to go out and just make a whole new part. Well, you really don't have to. Again, I'm just tacking it. I don't want to put a permanent joint there yet. Just a few drops. So now we've got our trailing edge thickness. Now we just need to set that little block in place. Now I know pretty much how much of that I'm going to have to razor out, get a brand new blade in there, and just cut that piece out. Now I want to cut. Notice how I've left the line on there. I want to make sure this is a nice tight fit. Just take a little bit out at a time. It is one reason I don't want to, with this type of a tip, I don't want to make a paper thin eggshell type of wingtip, because I need some support here to hold this little block in place. Okay, just need to keep taking some material out until that's a nice tight fit. Okay, now I want to get that I'm hardwood right to the very end, so I can use this soft block to get my alignment so I have a straight line down there now. And I have to just obviously sand the rest of that and blend it in. And once I have it tacked in place, I want to get a really good bead of glue on here. I don't want to have this loosening up. Now I just radius some of this little extra material off here. Now we're basically ready to tack this back in place and then do a final sanding and a final blending. This happens almost every time you carve a clamshell type wingtip. When you go to put it back in place, you notice that what's happened, it's kind of shrunken down this way a little bit. Well, there's a lot of choices. Obviously you can carve it oversized or work out. We need about a 1/16 of an inch here. But what I like to do is take a piece of scrap balsa wood, and this is just make a temporary, this is a extremely temporary piece. Just move the wing. That's just going to hold this apart. Not even going to glue it in place while we're doing the gluing. You can just do this. It just holds the clamshell apart. And what that'll do is let us get a nice alignment down around the cap strips. And then I can just reach in with a needle nose pliers or whatever and push this out. And all this is doing is spreading this apart. Just holding it apart. And now it's too big. Okay, so I know I can take some of this down. And I'll just take it down little by little by little until I find a spot where it's a perfect match to the wingtip. But that always happens. I don't know whether it's exactly because of the grain, the direction of the grain. Whenever you make clamshells, they always seem to shrink down just a bit. Let's see if that... Yeah, that's about right now. Now I want to... Again, I got the tape just holding this in place. Tack it first. Make sure we're not out in the left field. And once it's all tacked, then I can run a permanent joint on here. Now once I'm sure that this is lined up well enough, both sides, and I can run the whole bead around the whole piece and then pull out my little support that's in there. And that holds that open, the whole joint. Now I just can final sand this joint in. I want to get all the final sanding in before I put those little radiuses in the corner. Make sure, of course, that the grain is going on a 45-degree angle. I want to make the little triangle pieces, and this is the same piece I've used. C grain, but with the grain going, and the most important thing, grain going on a 45-degree angle. So it's just a question of cutting a few of these extra pieces up. I want to get a nice tight joint, and then the final sanding on this, and we'll probably be ready to go here in about a half an hour. Now I just find that to be one of the little details I really like on a model. And I want to get the tube, radius this off, get this all finished sanded. That tip is finished, and that's all we're going to get done tonight. Tomorrow we'll pick this up. Oh, I always like the way those little radius edges look. And President Nixon likes those radius edges too. Boy, oh boy. President Nixon, we went about 2 hours today and you didn't call. I hope everything's okay up there. Weekend, we're going to start on the actual work on the Spitfire bedroom. Can't wait. Now today we're going to start making up the control horns that we need, but I want to just put about 5 minutes of this on a tape. This is so important to realize. I guess it goes without saying, and not many people left in the world using 3-inch bell cranks on any planes. And I don't care if it's a my profile Cardinal, Nobler, whatever. A 4-inch bell crank always seems to be the size of choice, at least in the modern world. When years gone by, and we've made probably 3,000 of these bell cranks, we've made these bell cranks 4 inches by this dimension here, from the pivot to where the push rod comes out, is 13/16. Now, for an average person with an average ship, this seems to be just about right. I don't think many people that have used these bell cranks and horns. These ratios are the product of Jim Greenaway. He came up with this for his original pattern master, and we originally worked off his dimensions. Now these ratios, again, these are for a standard plane that's already been built. And the way Big Jim arrived at most of this was he had built several planes exactly the same, fine-tuned the control areas to where this would run on a 1-to-1 system. And we've used that right up to the Spitfire program, basically, and this has worked well, except for one small thing. When you're building a prototype plane, or a plane that has really never been built yet, you don't know if you're going to want to have a little faster elevator or a little bit slower elevator. So what we want to do is to give ourselves some choices. Now on the Spitfires, each one of them was different than the one before by a small amount, but we've used this adjustable control horn really to great advantage to fine-tune the turn of the plane. Also, on the horn I'm going to make for the flaps, because this is a take-apart plane, what will happen is the fuselage is going to come by where the flap horn would exit, and I'm not going to have a fillet in by the fuselage. I'm going to have the flap right up on the fuselage side here, if you can envision that. So what I want to do is I want to carefully measure this horn length and width, and I'm going to make up a custom horn. Now what I'm going to do is add one other choice to this horn, and the choice is going to be 1 1/4 inches. So I'll have 1 1/4 inches, 1 inch, and 3/4. I'll have 3 choices. Now this would be for very slow controls. Again, once you're building a plane that's already been built and fine-tuned, this is an unnecessary thing. But on a prototype plane, having these adjustments, worth its weight in gold. Now again, on any prototype, what this allows us to do is, if the turn is too sharp, too radical, if we didn't have adjustable controls, the only choice we would have would be to start adding a little bit to the flaps. If the turn was too slow and the plane was light, we'd probably start cutting the flaps down. In other words, and of course the opposite is here, if we wanted more pop in the corner, we'd probably make the elevators a little bit bigger. Well, this is real labor intensive and sloppy. If you have adjustable control horns, and I feel it's worth all the effort to put into this, even though some people don't need it. But again, if you're making a prototype, if you're making a standard Cardinal or a standard plane, say you're making an SV11, well, they've made enough of them that they know how to adjust these areas. In other words, the first plane you would build, you'd say, gee, it turned a little, it was a little soft turning. Well, we'll make the flaps on the next one a little smaller. Then the next one, yeah, we'll make the elevators a little bigger, get a little more power. But at some point in time, what would happen is you'd be happy with the design. Now, most of the designs would already have evolved into where people know what these areas are. And a good example is the Cardinal kit. Over 300 have been built. Those areas, and you don't need adjustable controls in a Cardinal, because a Nobler, you don't need adjustable controls in a Thunderbird, or in a Prowler. You don't need it. But in a new plane, we don't know for sure exactly how much of a throw we're going to want on the flaps, and how much, and especially this plane is going to have a little bit of a departure in flap design than we normally have. So by having the adjustability, it's hopefully going to save me the time of having to rip this apart, cut flaps, move flaps, whatever. Now, a lot of things are different when you make a prototype plane. If you were to build a Nobler, well, hell, it would be easy. You call up George Aldrich, hey, how much flap throw worked the best? How much this worked? If you're making an SV11, call Randy up, or just basically go by the plans. You're making an impact, call Paul Walker up, hey, I'm making an impact, what should I do, yada yada. Because he will already have known. He's built several of these. But since this is the first of this series of plane, with a different airfoil, different flap areas, different tail areas, so we want to have all those adjustable features. But what will happen is, well, if we get it right, well, gee, that'll be no problem at all, you know, we'll be real lucky. But if we get it wrong, having these adjustable controls will really make a difference in our ability to fine-tune it. Again, sometimes you're lucky. Several planes that I've built on the first shot were right. Never had to adjust anything. An example of that is on our I-beam Spitfire, I have that adjustable flap horn. Never needed it. Never needed a trim tab, never needed a tweak. Well, I find out that when you build in these adjustable features, you almost never need them. If you make a feature that, like an adjustable flap horn, it almost guarantees you won't need a trim tab. Well, by having these adjustable controls horns, it gives us more choices, and I know I'm repeating a lot of this because it's a very significant thing. Building a prototype plane, it's never been built for, you have to allow for all the variables. The flaps will be a little too big, flaps will be too small, a little more ratio, you want a smaller handle setting. And that's what we're trying to do at this point in time is, well, we're trying to be lucky. Lucky is good too. Alright, let's get down to shop and make some horns. Now, an excellent example of how these things evolve is on Ted Fancher's plane, and Ted was the original designer of this plane, but they've tried several different elevator widths. What they've done is move the hinge line forward, move it back, to the point where they have it pretty well figured out. Well, you know what? The first time they built the plane, you don't know that. See, that's the problem, is you're just not sure. Now, David's even got a plane that you can replace the tail with. Well, that's handy too. Having a secretary that answers the phone is even handier. David, get that phone. Oh, I usually keep a pretty good supply of spare material from making the horns. These are some special ones I made. I have some fancy stuff in here, some short ones. But what I'm going to need, some of the material we've already have. These are the end pieces when you run a punch press. Some of them already have the holes in place. I want to see if I have any that have the holes already in place. That'll save me a little bit of time on a milling machine, on a drill press, I mean. Again, here's where it's real nice to have a precision set of drills. What always gets me is how many people think making a horn is like a 2-minute job. Believe me, it's a lot more effort. A horn is probably the biggest bargain in all of model aviation. Obviously, a fine-tooth hacksaw blade would be, unless you're going to cut these off to a standard length. Long ago, you don't hold these with your bare hand when you're doing this operation. A good pair of vice grips is a good way to hold it. can get the radius on both ends this way. About a year ago, John Pothia gave me these neat little Dremel attachments that he turned the shaft down. This normally goes in an electric drill, but it fits onto even on my portable little Wizard. And what I want to do is I want to get all the oxidation off the part, radius all the edges. That's where a crack will always start, is on an edge. Get all the oxidation off before I braze it. Does a beautiful job of just cleaning up all the oxidation, rust, whatever's on this piece. Thing makes enough noise to choke a horse too. Now I'm pretty careful to polish up all these edges and radius everything. The reason for that is anytime a crack would start, this is mild steel by the way, 60 thousandths mild steel, and it comes with polished edges, with radiused edges, but I like to radius it even more because anywhere there would be a crack starting, that's where it would start, just like you polish a connecting rod on a car. Now what I did, believe it or not, this is just fantastic. Jimmy has the wire bender down at the shop, and I'm not taking an hour's ride down there, so I went and just bent one of these with vice grips and a vise. But you want to always make sure, obviously it's wide enough for the fuselage, I always want to make sure I have this part 90 degrees, and there's a good way to check that, of course, before we solder this up. In fact, what I'm going to do is make up the elevator horn at the same time. The idea being that you could probably check it this way too. Make sure you have it at 90 degrees. Also sight down the two wires this way. Now see, we're out just a little bit. Let's see if we can tweak this up. Need to tweak this just a bit. I'm going to do that in a vise. You can see this one is drifting down just a little bit. Let me go over to the vise and do this. And you can just sight down to the vise. The idea is not to bend, rebend, bend, try to get it right the first time, but obviously with the wire bender I get it right every time. But good old Jimmy, he's going to pay for pizza tonight, that's for sure. Now I want to see, just by sighting down I can see this two wires at the same time that I notice is good. I might as well make up the tail horn too, as long as I have all this mess in the shop. Okay, now obviously one of the things, since this is the hole that'll go to the belt crank, we'll use this hole, and I'll have one adjustment up for that'll in essence give me a flap adjustment, a little bit more flap. By moving this up, the flaps will move more than the elevators. This hole will be 1-to-1, and I'll have several choices of more elevator than flap. Again, it seems like at this point in time I could have saved the whole day by just putting standard horns in, but then if I want to do that fine-tuning thing and see if I want to build this design a second time, I want to know where these holes are going to wind up after trimming out the whole plane. And one of the things I learned in the manufacturing of horns over the years is you want to have a nice tight fit on the wire, and I want to get this hopefully just a tad off to one side because I'd like the push rod right in the middle, just a couple of thousandths over, and then I'll jig this up before I actually solder it, and I'll make up the tail wire too. Now I know a lot of people are thinking, and I know because I've tried to do it too, I've had these horns atomic welded, absolutely useless, the joint is too brittle. I've tried doing them with various brands of silver solder, and I've wound up with this brand, which is Harris Driver's brand. It's very expensive, by the way. I think it's, geez, I don't even remember. It's over $40 for this little roll here. It's not even an amount you can eat for lunch. But anyway, the key thing is to get the right flux too. White brazing flux. You need to have MAP gas. Well, sometimes you can do it with a propane torch, but MAP gas is a little bit better if you have it, or if you have propane, you're just going to wind up heating it a little bit more. You'd like the parts, like any soldering job, you'd like the parts to be immaculately clean, I've polished these with steel wool, tried to get them very nice and clean, free of rust, because obviously this is a joint I want to hold up forever and ever and ever. I don't want to have, you know, a year from now that the thing rusts right through. And any horns that, in fact, these will not have a real coating of CAD plating, well, you want to be sure you get all of that gook off of them before you put them into a plane and seal them up. A couple of drops of water will rejuvenate it. We don't use this but maybe once or twice a year, and it tends to dry out. Just a couple drops of water to make it like about a peanut butter consistency seems to work about the best. And it's just about the right consistency right now. Just about like, well, mayonnaise, peanut butter. There's always a little bit of material you can remove. In other words, this is the torsion arm. You don't want to take anything off of there. You don't want to take anything off the bend, and you don't want to take anything off at the very end. But this piece in here is inordinately strong. You don't need a full 1/8 inch here. But you want to leave the ball on the end, because that's going to rest in the tubing. But in here we can kerf out a little bit of material. And usually I can get a gram or two of dead weight out of there. Like 100 little places in a plane you can get some dead weight out. This just happens to be one of them. And I know a lot of people in the very beginning were always shying away from 1/8 inch horns. Oh, my plane will be too heavy. Yeah. So for a couple of grams, then they wind up with solder on the tail wheel, or who knows. I never substitute 1/8 inch horns, and I always have gotten away with, at least up to this point, getting some of the material off of them, polishing them. I can get them to where the amount that there's different than 3/32 horns almost doesn't matter. And if you build a plane and what's going to kill it is having a couple of grams of weight on a control horns, you ought to redesign a plane. Anyway, anything that's metallic, I want to wind up with as smooth and polished a finish as possible. Polished surfaces tend not to crack. Talk about good tips. This little tool, boy, just happens to be one of the really good ones. And these little wheels that John Pothia turned me on to, well, these are great. It's so handy not to have to be running around plugging a thing in, and super handy little tool. Now, of course, I want to jig this up so everything's at 90 degrees. I can set this up on any kind of, I get them both set up at the same time here. The idea is to pull with the heat, pull it through. Now it's coming out the other side. The MAP gas is definitely better than the propane, that's for sure. As soon as you see it start to melt, then pull the heat to the other side and let the heat pull it through the joint. Getting ready to go now. There it goes. Now it's out the other side. critical things. Let it cool to room temperature normally. Don't rush the cooling. And then we'll clean these joints up. Now, to get rid of the flux, it's a good idea, and we're going to go to lunch right now. Just leave them in a bucket or a sink of water, a little can of water. When you come back, the flux will all be off, and you can wire brush and clean them all up nice and shiny. Let them sit in a bucket of water here, a little glass of water. Half an hour or so while I'm having lunch. That'll get all the flux off. These will be ready to clean up. Lunchtime. After I cleaned all that flux off, I cut up 2 little pieces of tubing. I want to center them in here. Stay bright silver soldered them in place, and do the same thing for the tail horn. Okay, I'm going to clean this up and dress it all off. I just want to let it cool. Okay, these are, I guess, a little sanding tool or deburring tool or whatever you want to call it. And they're real good at cleaning up anything that's on the horn that you still want to get off this, and then I finish it up with a little fine wire brush. This will take all the burrs off. You can get a real fine wire brush, and these come obviously in rough, medium, fine. The fine ones seem to work real good. Okay, that's the heart and soul of our control system right there. Yeah, the last step in this horn preparation, I have a piece of an old gas tank. A piece of a tomato can will be fine. Some people prefer to use copper, no reason to. I've never worn one of these out yet, and the odds are good if I don't wear it out. I doubt if an average person would. I want to get somewhere a little bit shorter than that. Now, an alternative way would be to put a piece of tubing on. I don't like tubing for the simple reason that every once in a while you get a drop of CA in there. And when you get that drop of CA, you basically tear the back of the wing apart trying to get it loose. This way you have a little bit of a backdoor escape hatch if you happen to wick some thin CA in there. When you cut this, what will happen is it puts a bow in it. So I like to take it out on something flat and with a small hammer. Just get it perfectly straight. Again, I've found this way to be absolutely foolproof. Tried other ways with tubing and with nylon inserts, and tried a lot of ways I really was disappointed with this. This seems to be the way, and it's relatively easy to do and almost free. All you need is a tuna can. And what I like to do is just bend this around by hand, take a pair of pliers or vice grips, run them on a grindstone so they have a nice straight edge, and don't overdo the crimp. I don't need to make this a super tight fit yet. I'm going to pinch it nice and straight. Now, the next step is I need to set the clearance. Now, if you bend this and you don't get it right the first time, obviously just make another port. But setting the clearance, first overbend it, and this is what I'm doing right now, and that makes it that it's relatively tight. And now I like to get a pair of ordinary pliers, space them out, And by pinching it in this dimension very slightly, ever so slightly, you can get the clearance that you want, so it just slides easily. And if a little bit of CA or dope or anything wicks in there, you don't ruin your control system. The last thing I want to do is set this clearance. Now see, there's a little bit of a radius from the solder joint, so I want to press this down and make the equivalent of a little fluted edge on there, because that's going to be a bearing to control the side clearance, so we're not doing this when the controls are working. Takes a lot of that. So I'm just using the braze joint, the silver braze joint itself, to press in a little bit. Let's see if you can see that, a little bit of a flute, and that's going to act like a little, just like a little bit of a bearing here. And obviously you want to have this nice and free. We don't have any lubrication on that at all yet, but we will get some on there. That's what we're looking for, and we'll just replicate this for the rest of the horn, the throws that we're going to be doing. Now notice how I have the two. When I insert this, I want to make sure these two are confining this, and that controls the side play. Right now I have a little bit of play in it, but when I set this in, I'll make sure we get that right on center, and make sure we don't have anything binding in there at all. Best thing I want to do is I want to get this trimmed. Since it's only going into a 1/4 inch piece of wood, anything that goes in further than a 1/4 inch is just going to be dead weight. I'm going to put some little edges on it. There's no point having these tabs any longer than a trailing edge. You're not just going to hang around. Just going to go for a ride in the next 2 million square eighths. I have to get the shorter pliers to cut that corner off. But getting those corners off, then I'm going to take a parting wheel, put some slits on this just to give it some extra glue area when I insert this. Never had a pair of these little pliers when you wrap lines. Mike Kajeski turned me on to these. Boy, are these ever handy. Here's just one other place they're handy. Boing. And a little extra traction you can get on. Just going to take the parting wheel, put a couple of scratches in there. This little step, believe it or not, I radiused the edges off here. This little step helps the glue get a much better grip. Make it like a little washboard, put some little traction on it. Every little detail, every little step you can do to make a little improvement. Just one more step. Let me work on those bearings a little bit. Be ready for one drop of chain lube after I get this glued in. I don't want the glue being contaminated by the chain lube. Now while I have the material out, I'll do the tail horn too and just put the tail horn away. But this guy's ready to insert in the trailing edge of the wing. Okay, that was a good work session. Got the horns done. What I'm doing is with a yardstick, I'm measuring in from both wing tips where the wing actually ends, because I want to get exactly to center. Remember, this is an equal span plane and I don't want to have it off. And I know these joints don't really represent the center, even though this one did fall right where it should. So this is going to be the true center. This is going to be our alignment. Always good to check from where the wing ends to the center to see that you're not off by 1/8 of 3/32, even though probably it wouldn't matter. I just like to keep it honest. Because don't forget that on a take-apart plane, we want to get this right in the middle. I'm not going to have a lot of slop this way to get this lined up. I want to first get a notch that the horn will actually, the upright will ride in. We want to have enough angle so this can go all the way forward and all the way back.
step is to get 2 slits into the trailing edge and a little recess. Usually you could just take a piece of 1/8 inch wire and just run it along the trailing edge and it'll press it in just enough. But to get the 2 slots even with this, so we can lay this out and see if we're going to have equal clearance. Now most of this, you can get most of it out just like a hinge pocket with a blade. There's always some little glue in there though, there's always something. There we go. You're going to run a piece of sandpaper in there, clear it out. Because again, what I want to do is I want to have the horn on center this way. I don't want to have it this way. I don't want to have it that way. And I also want to have it that relative to the trailing edge it's straight. So it's like lining up a wing and a fuselage. A lot of things have to be straight. This is kind of one of the alignments that needs to be done really accurately. But I just took an ordinary piece of scrap 1/8 inch music wire and on a grindstone grind a little bit of a ball on it, and I want to just recess this. Now see where I've marked? This is how far out the horn actually comes. Just press it right in. That's usually enough. Now that's ready for a test fit. Now with a little press fit, I can just get this, because again I want the center of the 1/8 inch wire to be right on the hinge lines. I can press this in just a little bit more. It's sticking back out just a little bit too much. Make sure I don't have anything binding in there. This is sticking out too far. You know, the center line of the wire should be right on here to get a nice smooth throw. Otherwise this is swinging like in a hammock. You don't want to have this too far off the trailing edge or you get a bind in the controls. To get those really free controls, you've got to take all these little things into account. Before I even tack glue it, I want to make sure I'm at 90 degrees. A good way to do a quick test fit to see that you have everything in alignment is just use a couple of pieces of masking tape to hold that. And what I'll do is peel one piece back, put a drop of CA, pull the other one back, a drop of CA. I would want it at any cost, don't get CA down into that tube. If it gets in there, you tear off the whole back of the wing. It's really a disaster. But that's tacked in place. What I want to do is make sure I don't have anything binding here at all. I can just run a little bit up, just a few drops now. Just want to have it that even if, in the worst of all worlds, if something gets in there, and boy, you don't know how frustrating it is when that happens, boy. That's a trick you usually only fall for once in life. I put a couple of coats of thick CA on here, and I'm just trying to blend this into the trailing edge so I can get a straight pull on my reinforcement. Some real nice carbon fiber I have for another commercial purpose. It's got this carrier in here. So the first thing I want to do is trim off the carrier. It's kind of like a tissue paper carrier. This is the stuff Wayne Triven was using a while back. Anyway, for this purpose, it looks like it's going to be perfect, and it'll put on a nice, neat. The toe we were using before would have a tendency to get a little sloppy sometimes. Never broke, it just got a little sloppy. You want to get one side on first. Try not to get any down by the back, because as you bend it around, you don't want it to be hard there. You want it to be soft as it makes that bend. Just let one side kick off normally. The trick is not to have this part full of CA, so it wraps and makes a nice neat bind around there. And again, every step of the way, check to see that nothing is binding. Hey, this is a real good material. By the way, if anybody would like a foot or two of this for doing this kind of stuff, you're not going to go out and buy a roll for $167, and that's the only way I know they sell it. So this might be a good alternative. Be glad to send it for you for nothing. Boy, that carbon worked out much better than the other stuff that we were using. Real nice. Anyway, it's the end of the session. Tomorrow I'm going to try to get the push rod hooked up and maybe even get the flaps made tomorrow. You know, we had a really aggressive day. Hey, you think a little thing like the control horn would just be a detail thing. Psh, takes the better part of a whole day to do it right. Anyway, got to show you these cardinals. Love these little cardinals. And this is from Lee Self. And I'm assuming, since he didn't send the caption, that one of them belongs to his dad. And I have the most fantastic, I mean, an absolutely unbelievable video that Lee sent me, a couple of years ago. They had taken home movies that were about over the span of 20 years of his dad making a real steam-driven outdoor railroad, and he had them transposed onto video. If anybody really has real, and I mean this is stuff that could be on National Geographic, you basically can contact Lee, since it's his video, and the copy I have is out on loan to somebody. That video has been to everybody I know that loves model railroads. Lee, I'm tying up all your time with an advertisement for that video, but it's awesome. He made this railroad, he made the engine, he turned the parts, he cast the metal, and it was like a 20, actually that should be on some TV show. That was, Lee, even to this day, I'm in awe of that. Anyway, Lee Self in Montana, he's built a real Cardinal, full-size Cardinal. These are his latest creations. Looks like he's got 2 Brodak Cardinals ready to fly, and we hope you're going to keep in touch, Lee. The finish, he even sent me some video on him finishing out there when it was 6 feet of snow on the ground. Anyway, very inspirational guy to deal with. Lee, I hope your dad's still in good health. I hope everything is working on that railroad, and I wish you'd get me some more video or pictures one of these days. Thanks a lot, Lee. Say hello. Matt, today I'm going to take a break from working in the shop, working on this Ashley project. I'm going to work on my Spitfire bedroom, and I'm kind of excited about the fact we've already got the bedspread and the bed and a couple of the other things that are going to go in there. Getting excited about this room. Don't fanatically pursue something and kind of just take a day like today, take a complete break from the whole world of modeling. Hey, I love the profile of that plane. Goals of this room is we want to have a place to store our concourse props. Arlie Preslow put so much work into these props. It's a shame that they're sitting down in a dust-filled shop, so that's one of the things going to go up in a room, as well as the Spitfires, that's for sure. Now the deal is, see, Karen has these dolls all over the house. We have about 125 dolls scattered everywhere. From Jim Greenaway, Buzz Brodak. These dolls come from all over the world. But there's one thing. When people stay here as our house guest, one of the things they always moan and groan about is they don't want to sleep in a room full of dolls. Well, we're going to try to save some of that right now. We're going to be starting on this room today. I'll never forget the story with Joe Adamusco. He saw this dollhouse and he says, "How long did it take you to make that dollhouse, Wendy?" I said, one weekend, you know. Really took about 1.5 years. So he went and told his niece he's going to make her one for Christmas, and then he got bogged down. He spent over 200 hours making it. Anyway, and we even have our little things from England here, all our little figurines and stuff. But we need a Spitfire bedroom. That's what we really need in this house. Of course, we have a dedicated room for our trains, but we don't have a dedicated room for our Spitfires. And people that used to stay in this room used to complain that there's too many dolls. Don't want want to forget the frog collection. Well, we basically have a room for everything, but we need a Spitfire bedroom. We need it bad, too. So this is day one, putting the paint down, and this is all we're going to get done today, believe me. We got about half of the room painted, and it's time for lunch already. So I'm really looking forward to getting some World War II memorabilia, making this room look like you were a Spitfire pilot or something, I don't know. Actually, it's a decent sized room too, and a nice view out the window. But it's always good to take a break from the projects of working on the planes. Well, now that this is drying, this is probably the last time we're going to see this room without furniture. I know Karen's dyeing a bedspread for the what will be the bed. For any of you people that come over to our house and be our guest, you'll get to stay in the Spitfire, the now famous, almost famous Spitfire bedroom. Now in today's mail, I got some pictures from Rene Berger, and he's well, he was at the other house, and he's a nice long note how much fun he's having living in Arizona. He loves Joe Ortiz and Peggy and all that good stuff. And obviously wanting me to come out to VSC. Rennie, there's an easy way to do it. You send me a all expense paid ticket and let me fly your plane. I don't think I'll be getting that check. Anyway, sent some nice pictures of this is his Bellio 50, I can't read the note, 56 and a half ounces. This is a little cartoon, and how true this is. He sent this little drawing. Read the caption. Control line makes friends. Okay, this morning, hey, I'm excited about that Spitfire room yesterday. Got the first coat of paint on and everything. Anyway, this morning what I did, I went outside and the wind was blowing pretty nice. I gave this a nice light sanding with 400 sandpaper all around the edge because I wanted to just bring it up to a point where, yeah, it feels nice and it looks nice. I can start to envision what this is going to look like. Anyway, the next step is to bend the push rod and try to get everything in neutral at the same time. And there's about 7 or 8 really good ways to do it. I'll put some of these on the tape before we actually do it. Okay, now at this point in time, one of the things we want to try to do is we want to have the bell crank in the middle of its throw. At the same time, the flap one is in the middle of its travel. Here's what I always do. You always get one chance to bend this wire. Yeah, that's one way of doing it. If you get it right on the first shot, that's real nice. And we'll try to do that first. That's always our first choice. Second choice is if we don't get it bent right, because a lot of times the bell crank will be here and something will be out of alignment and it's binding or something, it's got more up than down. Then what I like to do is just cut this piece off and put a splice joint where the wire is coming out. And what the splice joint allows me to do is get everything really in good alignment. Wrap it with copper wire, of course. Silver solder it with Stay Bright. What this allows me to do, if you use this method up here, put the splice right up here, you get a really infinite, and I mean this is much more infinite than any thread could be, because a thread would be on a ball link. Sometimes you go one turn out, it's too much, one turn in, it's not enough. This is absolutely an infinite amount of adjustment. So this is always one of the first choices. Another way, you can use the end, and I've used this in the past, but this is not my first choice, is you can make the last piece of wire with the bend, and you can, before you finalize this, you can then
slide this piece of wire in and out, get it neutralized, and then fill this with epoxy. Well, and then I've wrapped it with carbon fiber. That's okay too, but first choice is we're going to see if we're lucky. And if we're lucky, we'll get it bent on the first shot. If we're not, we'll put the joint in. And again, sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not. A lot of good ways to do this though. There's not just one magic way and you get it right every time. Before I can do this alignment, I need to get the lead outs roughly about in the middle. Let's see, about in the middle of this area where they're going to be. As soon as I get this set, then of course I can put the crimp on this end of the lead out wire. And I'd like to be just about in the middle if possible, or wherever I assume these lead outs are going to wind up at some point in time. Now I've got the horn just roughly in neutral, and I want to get an idea of where mid-throw is. Mid-throw would be right there. Again, you only get to do this once, because if I have to bend the wire back even a little bit, we'll put that splice in there. Okay, we're in neutral. That's where neutral would be. That would give me that much forward. It's not in the middle yet. You'll see a point at which let's see if that's where the bend is going to be. Give that much forward. In fact, we want to go back just a little bit. That would be neutral. That would be forward. Back. Forward. Okay, let's see if it's our lucky day. The best way, of course, is to grab this with vice grips on both ends. Unfortunately, we only have one pair of vice grips, so this got to be a little bit of an ordeal. Most important thing, don't get a real kink in the bend. Don't overbend it and bend it back. And you also want to have this bend parallel to the tubing. And again, this doesn't look perfect. This looks almost okay. So now I need to take a little bit of material out of here. See, this will not slide in there right now. So I just take a little bit of that material until I can just pop that right in there. What I like to do is sight down here. Let's see if we can sight down here and get an idea if we have the same amount up and down. And if both things are in neutral, now I got to look in here. I'm going to make up a little gauge to check this. Your eye is a good way to do it, and if you're comfortable with that, but I'd like something a little more accurate. I'm taking just a piece of scrap balsa and get a center line on there. Make sure our center line is right in the center. I've added a little piece for the trailing edge, and this will give me just a rough idea. I can tack this onto the back of the wing, and then I can mark and measure the degree of deflection. The reason to have this nice set of accurate templates, and obviously that's going to set us up. Just one drop of CA will hold this on the back of the wing, or a piece of tape, it doesn't even matter. And then this can be our permanent gauge from now on for measuring this deflection. And I also can get an accurate, do I have more up and more down with this, or do I have enough? In other words, if I only have, I'd like to have at least 20 degrees, 30 would be better. More than that, I don't think is really necessary. Okay, with that piece of wood, the little gauge taped in place,
I can get an idea if the controls are equal in both directions, and it looks like we've had a lucky day. But if we didn't, well, not every day is lucky. Now I just want to take this off of the plane and measure. I've got it taped on both sides. Measure to see about how many degrees I have, just for my own reference. Now before I can turn this into a degree, I need to extend these lines so I can measure it with a protractor. I think we're in the ballpark. I think we've had a lucky day. But if we didn't, I would have no qualms with putting that little link in there. And now I can set. I need to set that point right on there. Wrong point, Wendy. Now, again, it's hard to do this through the lens cap. I need to get that point right on there, get the 0 line, and I can count here. I have 35, 37 degrees of up. Again, if it was 35 or 39, it wouldn't matter. That's certainly close enough. Now I need to turn it around and measure the other side. It's hard to do this through the lens cap, believe me. Hard to do it in real life. Now it looks like I've got 37 the other way too, or very close to 37. So I know now my flap travel in both dimensions is going to be about 37 degrees. And believe me, this a lot of times you don't get it this close, but I'll make sure that when the plans are drawn for this plane that we include this little gauge right on the plans of the plane. So I hope this is one little thing that'll take you about 5 minutes to make, and you can use in aligning up your own plane and getting all the controls in neutral. Nice little tip. A lot of times just having a little idea of how to make up a gauge like this, you'll get your next plane a lot more accurate and almost no extra work. And you can use it over and over again now. Again, this will go in our box with the templates, and we'll use this over and over again to line up the plane, any one we build. Now before I go any further, I want to put a notch in this wire. And this is the most important thing in the whole pusher, is not to get that bend and never bend it and bend it back. So I want to press that into as far as it'll go in, put a notch in here so I have a little safety wire, and solder this in position. Then I can figure out how much of this wood I can remove here. Well, this wood is just going along for the ride. As long as I have a hole here, I may as well make the hole equal on both sides. I just did that so that as I looked in, I could see the bell crank moving in there. Things I like to have a reasonably tight fit on. You can use eyelets. Eyelets are a good choice here, but because we're running up on a piece of brass tubing, I don't want to have a brass to brass whatever you want to call it, bearing or bushing. So what I'm using is a nut from a 348, and a 348 nut, if you just drill it out with an 093 drill, is a really nice tight fit. Now that's a nice tight fit. What I want to do is I want to grind a couple of notches in this wire, because when I solder this I want to have kind of a safety wire redundant system, and it goes without saying, all push rods face to the outside of the circle, so if these joints were to fail, centrifugal force would tend to at least hold them in during a flight, and then they'd fall out when you went to wipe the plane off, in theory anyway. But a redundant system, again, the nut is a nice tight fit. The reason for that is I don't want the solder dripping down into the bushing. So a nice tight fit is a big help. And I'll get a couple of wraps of copper wire in a notch. That should be a good redundant system. Okay, you can see how deep the notches are, almost halfway. Now we can put a couple of wraps of copper wire on that. That's a good redundancy system. Now I'm going to trim this last little extra piece of music wire off, and then put a Stay Bright silver soldered joint on that, and then we can wrap the lead outs. Again, every joint on the plane, except for the horns, the horn to the upright joint is Stay Bright silver solder. Most important thing, any Stay Bright joint, after it cools, deflux it with baking soda and water. We'll put a drop of chain lube on that right away. That'll keep that joint from corroding in any way. I want to make sure I got the rest of this material around here so there's no rubbing anywhere near that push rod. Again, I want to make sure there's no place on this where there's any binding at all. Okay, next thing is the lead out ends. I've tried a lot of different ways of wrapping these ends, and I've tried 2 or 3 different crimps, and I have another set on order even. But it seems like the best way is just, at least for right now, is the Sullivan, the little crimps that come with the Sullivan 027 lead outs. And I've kind of liked the flexibility of that cable as opposed to some of the other cables that are stiff. Okay, I have this crimping tool that I'm using, and I've done these so many different ways, and I've done the same test. What I like about this crimping tool is it doesn't crimp all the way down to the end. It leaves that, and that's where I'm afraid if you flew the plane a million flights, right there is where it would tend to scuff on the cable. But what I wanted to do, and this is something I suggest everybody do when you do something, anything new, find some place where you know it's solid and put some real force on it. Now believe me, I'm not the weakest person in the world. That's a good couple of 100 pounds. So that looks like it'll be fine. But I always like to do the test before running out and doing something on a plane, or even worse, doing it for a customer. Get an idea what a real crimping tool does. It doesn't put a sharp edge on anything. I'm doing this without a cable so I can look down that barrel and see just if that's a smooth edge. And it's the radius on that edge that makes this work a little better than just pinching it with pliers or putting it in a vise, which is we've done in the past. And it's probably okay, but this is one step a little better, I think. Now, a couple things I learned. First of all, these little nippers that I bought these in Home Depot, these seem to work well for cutting. And here's one of the times you need a nice cut, because if this is a rough edge, it's not going to want to go. The crimp is a very tight fit. And I was even thinking maybe I'd have to CA this. This is starting to unfurl already since I've been fooling around with it. Let's see if this is any better. And I want plenty sticking out the other side. Now, I want to leave myself enough material on these, this is as far in as it'll go, that just in case I ever have to re-wrap these, I don't have to, they're not going to wind up inside the wingtip, so I want to leave a little extra material there. Let's see if that's about right. Yeah. Yeah, that would leave me enough material to make another wrap, which is, well, cheap insurance when you're doing this kind of stuff. After I use this brand of lead outs, or I ordered one more type of cable. Peabody's supposed to get it for me. But this certainly, I know this will work. This is not a... And we're making so many of those bell cranks up now. I'm basically running out of cable all the time and running down a store to buy more. A lot of people I know like to, and I'm one of them, like to have the lead outs exactly equal when you're in neutral, and this way you can swap lines from, well, you probably could do it if you made all the planes the same way. But again, I want to have the two criteria. I want to have enough room to make an emergency wrap if I ever have to do that. And by the way, these things look like brilliant decisions years later when you get to, if you ever have to use them, it's like having an extra spare tire. So right there is where I want to have my other wrap. Look at this phone. I can't believe this. Alright, I got these lined up in spite of having a lot of phone calls. Very nice and smooth. Okay, in this session what I wanted to do, I went through my 1/4-inch wood, got two decent pieces. I really don't have what I was hoping to have is real super pieces. Well, I was hoping to be younger and thinner and have more hair and everything too, but not going to happen. Now what I want to do is I'm trying to, there's a compromise to the flaps on this plane. I'm trying to come up with a design that's going to, well, let's go over and look at the picture here. Miss Ashley has a slightly raked back edge. Well, it's not practical to do that without a, not really, without a swept back trailing edge, and that results in two horns and a lot of complicated things I didn't want to get involved in, since this is a basic plane that I want to use for heavy duty practicing, and I want, you know, I don't want to have any Mickey Mouse things in here that might or might not affect the plane. Anyway, what I wanted to do, I'm going to, as a compromise, lay this out with a straight trailing edge. That'll mean the airfoil will be basically the same for the whole length of the flap, and that's a significant advantage. A simple reason is when you have a double taper, well, you've got a lot of things to worry about. When you have a singular taper, and the flaps are going to be 2.5 inches wide, that should result in a very easy to carve flap. And what I may do as one of the possibilities that I was thinking is somewhere down the road make two sets of flaps, one with this edge coming off on an angle. But again, there's certain compromises here I have to make. For instance, I'm not going to be able to make a swept back elevator like this, but I can get this by getting it straight. It'll give as much of an illusion of a swept back wing as I possibly can get. First step is to get one straight edge on all of the flap wood. I've got to pull a pad off the table to do that. Now I want to get an idea which is the straightest side of this wood. Actually, this isn't too bad for a piece that isn't really truly 1/4 grain. Now in this case, you can see I've got a big check in this piece of wood right here. Well, that'll be part we cut off. That'll just be, I'll make it a little easier to finish it that way. So I want to true up one edge of this perfectly true first. That's where that sticky back sandpaper comes in. Make sure, of course, on a flap you're starting with a perfectly straight piece of wood. No, you wouldn't want a piece that had a bow in it or whatever. Now, because there's a chance this wood might spring, what I'm going to do is cut 1/4 of an inch off the side that I haven't sanded yet. Again, the flap width is going to be 2.5 for the whole span, but I don't want to take a chance that these are really the only 2 decent pieces of wood I have right now. So if it springs, I can take another 1/4 inch off this side, or I can take 1/4 inch off the other side. Again, I'm just giving myself a little insurance policy, and then I'll see which side of the wood I want to use, because I'm going to have to cut some off, and I'll try to cut it off the heavier side. Again, this piece didn't spring much at all, so I'm just going to take the other piece, the other 1/4 of an inch off the same side. But if it was to spring, then I'd want to take the 1/4 inch off the other side. Now, one of the things I want to do is make sure I'm getting a neat hinge line here. I'm not going to have any bow. In fact, there's a little hard spot right up in here, and it's a little off out here. And I can just lay some of that sticky back paper there and just pick up the little high spot. It's right. I always find it's a lot easier to get all these edges trued up long before you cut the hinge pockets and put all the hinges in place and everything. And especially in this case, I want to see a real nice hinge line going down the whole hinge. I don't want to see any of this wavy stuff. I always leave a little bit of extra out on the flap tip. A lot of people would do that right now. Now I have to put the pocket for the horn and everything. I want to leave myself a little extra material, because when I get the final hinges in and everything, at least temporarily, and I want to blend this in very accurately. That little extra material will come in handy later. Now with the edge very parallel, nice and neat, what I want to do is take a fine line pen, using my finger as a guide, and get a center line around the whole flap. That's kind of a little practice first. If you had trouble doing this, an easy way to do it is just take some 1/8 inch tape, lay a piece of 1/8 inch tape, and then trace it. But I want to work off a center line for the whole flap, so I want to go around the whole perimeter. I want to go completely around the edge. Looking at what I did, I put a piece of 1/8 inch tape on one side, and because there's no taper, if these flaps were tapered, in other words bigger at the horn than at the tip, I couldn't use this method. But because they're a straight flap, in essence this is going to be a straight line. What I'm able to do is take all the material off one side. So I'll take this all off the bottom, and then in effect should give me a relatively nice flat top and a completely equal taper by just taking all the material off the bottom. But again, I'm only able to do this with a flap that's the same dimension. What'll happen, and I've done it too, I thought at one time I was so cute, yeah, I could do it this way, but in a tapered flap, as you get out to the tip, you'll be putting a twist in it. So you only want to do this on a straight flap. What you do is have it on a flat table with the tape at the bottom, and try to get, if you can, hold the plane at a little bit of an angle. And if I'm real lucky, I was lucky with that push rod, by the way, I can take this off in about maybe 8 or 10 shavings, and there'll be very little sanding at the end when I'm done. Now if you're in doubt, it's always better to have the plane set to take thinner shavings than heavier shavings. And if the wood comes off in one spiral, you know you have a decent blade anyway. Oh, nice. I just made a little adjustment so it even comes off thinner. And when I get near the end, I don't want to do the last cut with the plane. I'll do the last cut with a sanding block. Maybe I can get one more out of here. Every time I say that, I'm sorry I did it, but one more. Now I'm actually touching a tape now. The rest we'll do with a sanding block. Last little bit I like to get with as long of a sanding block as possible. Notice that I'm holding this on a flat glass table. I don't want to do this in my lap, or I'll definitely get a bow sanded and carved into it. I like to run the vacuum cleaner while I'm doing this too. Really trying to keep the dust down in the house for Karen's benefit, for my benefit too. Anyway, it makes one less thing you have to worry about if you have straight flaps on a plane. And we've basically taken all the material off one side of this. The taper in here, and I could just take the tape off. Alone, see what I did? I just taped this down with some masking tape, and this is a little bit of a help as keeping the dust down, especially the very fine dust, unless you're working out in a garage or somewhere where nobody has to breathe that in. It's the back edge first, and it's important, at least when I do it, the easiest way is with a long sanding block, a short sanding block, and you wind up making waves. I want to get a nice round radius on the back. I've done the other flap off camera so that we can hopefully get this leading edge carved up before this night runs out. I've been getting a couple hours in every morning and a couple hours every night. I'm really starting to get excited about this guy. Next session we get, we'll put the horn retainers and the hinges in. Okay, I got a little time here and not much. I need to measure, let me get this out of the way. I need to measure how far back this horn goes, and I'm going to take a Dremel tool and put a little notch in here for my tube. I want to have this slide on a tube. Now before I insert the tube, it's always a good idea to take a little Vaseline or grease or whatever, or wax even, get this waxy, because once I slide this on, if I put some CA in there and it wicks in, then it gets to be a pain in the neck and it tears the flap wall up. So the first thing is to get that notch in there. First thing I want to make sure is that I have a true 90-degree edge before I put that slot in. That is a nice little trick on how to get the alignment perfect the first time. But the first thing you got to do is start with a 90-degree angle. Now I want to just take the line off. I want to make sure it's 90 degrees. I don't want the tube going in any further than this. Cut up 2 pieces of tubing. I've just scratched the outside of it. I want to make sure I have a nice tight fit. A little bit longer than what I need. And I want to rough it up so I get a good bond to the glue. Then I'm just going to take and make a little recessed little pocket for these right in the edge of the flap. So what I need to do is get this on here. Maybe get those birds off. Okay, now I need to know how far back, because it's not going to go up to the curve. So this will go back to here. That's how far back that has to go when I cut the notch. Get a little piece out of here so I can get this up over the curve of the horn. Just makes it a little better, a little neater fit when we put the final fit on this. Look at this. I try to do this. 1 second. Have a little bit of grease on the drill. This just keeps a little insurance policy if I get some CA in there. Let me get the phone. This is where this gets to be a little bit tricky, and I want to show this. This is the best trick of all. Now, I haven't cut the pockets for the hinges yet. I've got a little bit of oil on there, just so if some CA wicks in there, I'm not in trouble. I may as well get one off. Now, the idea here is, in the past when I've tried to insert the tube here, I've always wound up with that, or with this, some angle just a little bit off. Well, an easy way to do this is I put a couple of drops of slow drying CA on here, and then get the tube all the way up in position. This really is a good trick. Make sure I'm exactly parallel to the hinge line. Let that sit in there, and just let the CA harden up. And it's already pre-programmed into position. So when you take this off, the little tube is exactly lined up, exactly how it should be. It'll slide right back on. Now before I do that, I'll harden up all these edges with some thin CA, so that I'm working with a hard little pocket for that to go in. Okay, so I want to get these, let that kick off. Now with that in place, all we need is one little, just get that, let that tack out. When I take that off, that tube should be tacked right in place, then I can fill this in. Okay, that's ready. I'm just going to make up this little edge with some plywood, and that's probably all we're going to get to do today. See, I'm still squeezing out these little sessions, one right after another, but hey, little by little this wing is coming together. I want to make sure I have all of these edges nice and true before I cut out that little. I want to get a plywood edge. A plywood edge acts as a rib and a reinforcement at the same time. And tomorrow, I guess we got to put the hinges in and get the hinge line done. We'll be in good shape tomorrow. We're probably going to finish up this wing in the next 1 or 2 sessions. Now, a lot of times, and probably what has happened in this case too, is you get a little drop of CA down there, and you can't get a nice smooth fit onto the wire. I want to be able to take these on and off, and I want them to stay exactly at 90 degrees. I don't want to wind up where this cocks one way or another, because this is going to slide right up on the fuselage when the plane is put together. And that's a real nice way of doing it. That's one of the best ways I know of. That's all we're going to get done tonight. Hey, in today's mail, this came from Caesar Heredia, I guess is the right way to say it. Anyway, this is Moki 51, 62 ounces. This is his variation of an impact. With Caesar at a, looks like they have a little tent. Maybe they're at a contest, doesn't say in the caption. Kind of cool, nice looking impacts. Hey, and appreciate. It's such a problem. He's from Buenos Aires. Such a problem because it's really difficult to get mail down there reliably. Well, we're going to send him some stuff today. Last thing in this session, I cut out the 2 little ribs of double laminated 64th plywood. 2 layers with the grain going in this direction. And with that, it's time for supper. It's time for everything to end here, and we'll pick this up in the morning. Okay, today, let's hope we can finish this up, get the hinges in here. What I'm trying for is, I want to finish this off, of course, today. What I'm trying for, I watch the weather. This time of year, you have to really watch the weather in this part of the country. What's going to happen in the next 3 days? They're predicting nice warm temperatures, and it's really been too cold to do anything. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of a push on, try to finish this up. The hinges, the leading edge in. Because what I'll be able to do, I really don't like to use dope inside the house if I don't have to, but I'd like to start the dope into the wing. Then that could be drying while I work on the next part of the project. This is 2 layers of 64th plywood with the grain going in this direction. I'm going to get this glued on and then use the Dremel tool to finalize that final fit. It's a lot easier to do it that way. Make the piece oversized and then Dremel the rest of it off with the sanding drum. And notice I've also hardened up the wood here with thin CA, 3 or 4 coats of thin CA sanded down. That's ready to put on, and obviously try not to get any CA down into the tube or we'll have to drill that out. The way to do this and get it perfectly flat is to lay it on a flat piece of glass. This is thin CA, the thick CA. This is usually one of the little tricks that'll work well for you. What I do is put a little bit of kicker on this end so it fills in, and by pressing it down now, I can keep it really perfectly flat up against the glass. What I always do is leave the last little bit to be done with a sanding block. Now as I'm sanding these little edges in, of course you sand through the spot where you've hardened it up with the thin CA. So what I do is get about at least 3 coats. As soon as I see I've sanded in and gone through, obviously what I'm doing is picking up the hard spot, because I want to keep the edge of this wood really as hard as possible anyway. I don't want to ever have an 1/8 inch horn just going into balsa wood. Always let it kick with the dust from the paper towel. There it goes. Paper towel or a Q-tip. Best tricks you can ever learn is somewhere in your modeling. Any of the areas of balsa wood that you want to be hard, edges, things you don't want to have damage to, people touching it or whatever, harden it with thin CA, rub it with a Q-tip, let it kick normally. That gives you a nice hard edge, and that hard edge is easy to sand nice and flat. It's not so hard that you can't sand it down nice and flat. And this edge is going to be twisting this for the next, I hope, 15, 20 years. Thing is, I have to take this part and carve a little bit of a notch in it, otherwise the horn can't slip in all the way. And just getting a little notch the same way we did on the aluminum tubing, that'll allow these to slip right back in place. And a little round cutter is usually the best one for this. And that'll allow the horn to slip right into the edge. Allows that to go right on. Of course, if there's there's probably still a little bit of oil left on that. And if it doesn't go in all the way, I'll just by hand take an 1/8 inch drill and give myself a little more clearance up in the front here until I have it that it'll slide all the way on. Just to get that little extra clearance, I do this by hand. Never be tempted to chuck this in a drill press or a Dremel tool and do this, or it'll just come right out the back and go. It's already gone through my hand. In my younger days, when I didn't realize exactly what the easiest way to do this was going to be. Now you can see I get a nice tight fit right in there, but I don't want to take any more than I have to off. I want that to be as solid as possible. I don't want a big gaping hole in there. You have that finalized. They also sighted from both ends to make sure the horns, one isn't up or down. In the case that we already had that leveled out, it was pretty level. Now I need to trim the tips as the next thing. I want to get my edge right down the edge, and I'll leave the line on. I want to leave the line on and then bring this in with a sanding block. Center line back on. Well, we're at the end of this tape. We're going to have to pick up the hinges on the next tape, the doping and the tissuing. But we've gotten a lot of the little details, and I hope you've picked up some information that'll be useful to you, or even if it isn't, pass the tapes around so the other people can see if any of these little tips and techniques. These are the ones I've basically used and picked up from other people and kind of invented along the way. Hey, and I hope you'll really, really enjoy sharing some of this information like I do. It's really finally starting to look like an aeroplane part. Okay, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next tape that'll be following this. Well, hopefully you'll be enjoying all of these real soon. Somewhere in the upcoming tapes, I'm going to put some little splices of this when we start the fuselage. This is from Al Rabe. Footage of how he made the shells for his Bearcat. Some very, very interesting stuff. Something not a whole lot different than what we're going to be trying to do, except we'll be doing it with composite. Some pictures of Al Rabe's workshop here and some of the techniques he's used. We're going to hope to get him to contribute something into this video program anyway. Look at a twin in the back.
And there's a half a Mustang, Hornet.
This is Al Rabe's workshop, and boy, what a great article in Stunt News Win Paul did up for him. Really great. Look at these models.
Bond's Mustang.
Anyway, we're just going to let this tape play out, and we'll see you on the next tape.
And up at the top is Sea Fury. A little worse from the wear. Result of being landed upside down. Well, it wouldn't exactly call it a landing. Molds, shells, whatnot. Interesting thing is, of course, that every airplane in here, except the half a Mustang profile, every airplane in here is molded. And this is the Bearcat under construction. I just rewrapped the shell. Tape marks. And we can take a little bit closer look at this. He's starting at the nose. This structure has to be essentially complete before the shell is pulled on. As a matter of fact, everything here was done before the shell was pulled on except for the installation of the tail wheel. Interesting thing, of course, is that the fit between the shells and the bulkheads is absolutely perfect, light tight, and of course that's a result of making the formers and the mold templates off the same paper template. And then, of course, the new airplane's going to have shock.
Now, it isn't your VCR. This tape that I have obviously is an old tape, and the sound quality is not good on it, but I don't think you need the sound quality to see how cool this stuff is. And he shows how to make these shells right from scratch.
At this point in construction, the shell's about as featureless as it can be. Nevertheless, it's coming along. And this, of course, is my reincarnation of my 1970 Bearcat 3, which is classically cool. Another view of my workshop, P-51, P-47. Lynch actually built one of those. and some art on the walls. Art and memorabilia. Stars, which I blew for Saudi Arabian. About 10 of the ugliest stewardesses that you ever saw. Of course, dating back to the 1930s. Really gorgeous pencil drawing of a Mustang. Pen and ink, excuse me. It's an original, signed. I guess we can do without the